Hi readers, Chris here. Today I'm going to be talking about my November reading wrap-up and my December TBR. If you remember from last month, I set a very aggressive reading schedule for myself for November. Unfortunately, I did not get through all the books that I wanted to, because, you know, life happens, but I did get through 4, and I'm going to be talking about those 4 in order of my favorite, starting with my #1 favorite book of November, which was Fool by Christopher Moore. I already did a 1-minute review for Fool, but basically this book was just a delight. It's super silly, it's super ridiculous, and it's everything that reminded me of why I love Christopher Moore. If you're not familiar with Christopher Moore, he does really super funny books all the time, and I'm just going to read the little warning that's in the front of this book to kind of give you an idea of what his style is like. So it says, warning, this is a bawdy tale. Herein you will find gratuitous shagging, murder, spanking, maiming, treason, and heretofore unexplained heights of vulgarity and profanity, as well as non-traditional grammar, split infinitives, and the odd wink. If that sort of thing bothers you, then gentle reader, pass by, for we endeavor only to entertain, not to offend. That said, if that's the sort of thing you think you might enjoy, then you have happened upon the perfect story. This is a King Lear retelling from the perspective of our fool named Pocket. Again, it's such a delight. I can't explain it, but if you've never read Christopher Moore, I wouldn't start with this one because it is a little ridiculous. I would definitely start with some of the other books in his bibliography. But if you are into Shakespeare and you want to laugh, Fool, I would definitely recommend. That's why it was my favorite for November. Next up, in close second place, is Cress by Marissa Meyer. Cress is the 3rd book in the Lunar Chronicles series, and because I just finished it like at the end of the month, literally November 30th, I finished reading it, I have not done a review yet. I do have a 1-minute review plan that will be coming out later this week. So all I'm going to say is that the Lunar Chronicles is quickly becoming one of my favorite YA fantasy / science fiction tales of all time, and I love how each character in this series is like a different retelling. So Cinder, the first book in the series, was a Cinderella retelling. Book 2, Scarlet, was a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, and Cress is a Rapunzel retelling. We have this girl named Cress. She has been trapped up in this satellite since childhood, and what happens to her in her story is super fun. I love how her long blonde hair goes everywhere, and I think for this book, more than any other book in this series, like, yes, it's YA, so there's a lot of, like, YA romance, and some of that stuff is, like, okay, but I really enjoy the romance that's in Cress, mostly because of the character that Cress has a schoolgirl crush on, Captain Thorn. We met him in a previous book, and we get to know him a lot more in this book, and he's, like, one of my favorite characters so far. So, more to come on Cress, but I definitely loved this book as well. Next up is my reader recommendation for the month, and that is The Mysterious Benedict Society. Ooh, and that is reflecting not so great. So this book was recommended to me by Jen Park. Jen, if you're watching, thank you so much for recommending this book to me. It was super, super cute. So the setup of this book is that we have a bunch of kids who see an advertisement in a newspaper to come take this special test. And this test it's basically like a test of intelligence, but not in the way that you or I would normally think about it. each kid that passes the test passes it using their own form of intelligence. So just for example, one kid is like really good at figuring out puzzles. So that's how he's able to pass the test. And one little boy has a photographic memory, so that's how he's able to pass the test because he remembers everything. One kid is very creative, knows how to use a lot of tools, and that's how she's able to pass the test. So there's all these little things that when the kids work together, they're able to solve this like super complex mystery. So really, I reviewed this book over on Instagram. I did not have a time to do a video about it, but if I have time in December, I will go back and do it. But I really loved this book. It was super cute. I definitely want to go back and reread the other books in this series because I want to find out what happens to these kids and see their story continue. So this book is number 3 out of 4, but I still really, really liked it. And that brings me to my 4th book of November, which I wish I read more books because I would put this lower on the list, but that is The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. And I have to say, like, I didn't dislike the book, but I didn't like it as much as some of King's other writings. So I have been on a journey to read all of Stephen King's books, from the first book he published, Carrie, till if he stops coming out with books, maybe someday I'll catch up. But before this, you may remember that I read It by Stephen King. It, which is like over 1,000 pages, super thick, super complex. I absolutely loved it. And because of that, I feel like The Eyes of the Dragon did not quite match up to that. It is a much simpler story. We have a kingdom here. We have an old king. He's got 2 sons. One son is kind of the favorite. He's the heir. He's beloved by everyone. And then we have the younger brother who's kind of, you know, more angry. He's always in his brother's shadow. He wants his dad's, you know, affection and approval. He's not getting it. And then, of course, the king has an evil advisor. We've seen that evil advisor role many, many times. The one thing that I'll say that I found fun about this one is that a lot of the characters, like King Roland and Randall Flagg, or Flagg, the magician, who is his evil advisor, are names that we know from other King's works. So, for example, Roland, he's the main character in the Dark Tower series, and Flagg also appears in the Dark Tower series, but he also appears in The Stand, and he also appears in, I think, some other books as well. Like, they're familiar characters and they're familiar places, and a lot of those references I found super fun. So even though it's a much simpler tale, a much smaller tale, like, I still liked it, but I just did not like it as much as I liked it and some of his other books. So that's why I'm putting this one at the bottom of the list, because it did not measure up to those other ones. So those are the 4 books I finished in November. So that's going to bring me to my December TBR. And of course, first up, we have the remaining books that I did not finish in November. First of which is going to be The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. So this is the second book in the King Killer Chronicle. I read the first one, The Name of the Wind, back around this time last year, so I thought it would be a good idea to finally read book 2. I really loved book 1, but I was really mad about the way it ended because it's not a complete story. Now that I know that, going into this one, I hope I'll be a little less angry by the time I get to the end of this one. I'm about 3/4 of the way through, so I'm close to getting to the end, but I actually think I'm enjoying this one more than the first, only because I already know a lot of the characters. I already know kind of where the story is going, and I'm having a really fun time with this one. There is a lot of stuff in here. I don't want to say too much about it, but if you've never read this series, basically we have a young boy whose name I know I'm going to mispronounce, but I'm calling him Kvothe. I called him Kavothi in my head for the longest time, but then someone corrected me. So Kvothe, I'm sure someone will correct me again, but He, like, grew up basically with, like, a traveling minstrel type family, but then his family was killed at a young age. He has kind of been on a quest to avenge his parents ever since then, but the people or the beings that killed his family are, like, creatures of myth. No one really knows anything about them, and so while he's doing this, he's also trying to learn to be a magician. The magic system, the way that magic works in this world, they call it sympathy. It's such a cool way to look at magic. It's really, really interesting. It's super intricate, super detailed. I don't even know how I could possibly explain it if you haven't read it, but it's super unique and I love it so much. I'm a big fantasy person, so anytime that someone can bring like a new aspect to magic and that whole thing, I think is really, really exciting. So yes, Wise Man's Fear, I'm working on it. Definitely shouldn't have any trouble finishing this in December. The other fantasy book that I'm reading, because I couldn't stop myself from starting this, is The Burning of God by R.F. Kuang. This is the third and final book in the Poppy War series that I started reading earlier this year. I read the Poppy War back in February or March, and then I read the second book, The Dragon Republic, over the summer. Oh, loved that one. And now I'm finally reading The Burning God. I'm about halfway through this. Again, I can't read this fast enough, but I'm also starting to get book anxiety. And I want to know if anyone else has felt book anxiety before. And what I mean by that is that I love this book so much that I want it to end, but I also love it so much that I can't stop myself from reading it, even though I know it's going to end, and I'm going to be sad when it ends because that means there's not going to be any more, but I also really, really want to find out what happens. So I'm having a little book anxiety with this, but it's not going to stop me from reading it because this is quickly becoming one of my favorite adult series. If you don't know anything about the Poppy War, we have a young girl named Rin. She's a very, like, poor girl, comes from the South, from, like, a really rural type area. She gets into this, like, prestigious military school. She's learning how to be a shaman, which means she can call down the power of a god. But her country, Nakara, which is basically China, the author used, like, real Chinese history to base this story off of. Her country is kind of split apart. There's all these different warring factions. Like, there's an island nation called, I forget what it's called, but it's basically supposed to be like Japan, kind of. And then we have, you know, the white people, the Hesperians, they've come over. So there's all these different factions. Rin is trying to figure out where she fits in. And the reason that I really love this series so much is because Rin is not your typical protagonist. Most female protagonists, like, they just have certain qualities about them, and Rin is an absolute disaster. She is a mess. She's gone through periods where she's been addicted to opium. She's gone through periods where, like, she can't control her rage. She commits extreme, like, violence. Like, she is just, like, she's just a mess. And I love that she is not, like, she's not a black and white character. Like, black and white means you're good or you're bad. That's not Rin. She's in the middle. She is shades of gray. And this series, like, really illustrates that in such a good way that I feel like it is so refreshing. I feel like most of the characters in this book are not all good and they're not all bad. All of them have, like, good qualities about them, but also, like, super bad qualities about them. And I really, really love that. I feel like it's so refreshing to stuff that I usually read. And again, I'm having anxiety. I want to see how it ends, but I'm also going to be really sad when it does. So that is my second read for December. And then last but not least, my last holdover from November is Artemis Fowl, The Last Guardian. I've been reading the Artemis Fowl series all year. I think there were 7 or 8 books. I've lost count. This is the last one. I am just about halfway through, not quite halfway. I knew I wasn't going to finish this in November because even though it's a short book, I wanted to read all this other stuff first, so this one kind of got pushed to the side a little bit. But if I'm being honest, like the first 4 books in this series I really, really liked. Love them. They're super fun. We've got a young boy named Artemis Fowl. He is super, super smart. He calls himself a criminal mastermind. He discovers that there's this whole like underworld of fairies and technology. He wants to get his hands on it for money, etc., etc. All of the first 4 books were super, super fun. But since then, the later books in the series, I've had a lot of problems with. There's some actions that Artemis has taken that I've kind of really rubbed me the wrong way. They've had some villains in the later books that I didn't think were that great. So my expectations for this book are kind of low. Like, they're kind of low at this point. I'm still hopeful that the series will kind of go off with a bang. I will say, you know, a few chapters in that they have brought back my favorite villain of the series, so that's a plus. I have seen one of my favorite characters, Juliet. That's a plus. So hopefully this series goes out on a high note and doesn't let me down like some of the other ones did. But again, I haven't been regularly reviewing these books on BookTube. I have been doing it over on Instagram. But I think when I finish the series, I will kind of do a series review or wrap up at the end of the year to close out the Artemis Fowl chapter of my life. And as if that weren't enough, that brings me to the other books that I am adding on to my TBR for December, because even with the holidays and stuff, I didn't want to pile on a bunch of books at the end of the year, but I have to continue with my Stephen King journey, so I am reading Skeleton King. Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew I am reading in December. So this is a collection of short stories / novellas. I think the most known one is probably The Mist, because I know that was a movie a few years ago. I never saw the movie, so I know a little bit about it from like stuff I've heard, but I don't really know the details. So I'm excited to read that one. I don't know anything about any of the other stories in here. I really just started this one, so I can't say much about it yet, other than I hope to finish this one by the end of the year so I can keep going with my Stephen King journey. Next up, I have the last book in the Lunar Chronicles series, which is Winter. First of all, I wanted to finish the Lunar Chronicles before the end of the year so I can wrap up this YA series. I started so many series this year, and I haven't finished most of them, but I really want to finish this one. And I figured, hey, it's winter time. It's the perfect title. It's the perfect time to read this. Again, I just started this one, have not gotten very far, so don't have much to say about it other than I hope it measures up to the other books in this series. And then one more book, because why not? There always has to be one more, and that's going to be The Bright and the Pale by Jessica Rubinowski. Again, I got this book in one of my Spearcraft book boxes earlier this year, I think. It might have been last year. I don't even remember. But I know it came in a Spearcraft book box. Again, I don't know anything about this book other than it's supposed to be a YA fantasy-ish type book. And I thought it's giving me all the wintry vibes. I thought it would be a good idea to read it. And it should be a pretty short read. I'm about a quarter of the way through this one. So I will say this one has thrown me off a little bit. It's one of those books where it throws a lot of information at you and then you have to kind of try to figure it out as you go along. So I'm a little information overloaded on this book so far. It's about a young girl whose family was lost to this deep freeze came through and froze her whole town. So it's frozen in time. She escaped. Now she's living with this thieves guild basically, and she's trying to collect money and materials so that she can go and get this champion of the bright god, I think, who's supposed to help defeat, there's this evil czar. you can tell there's like a lot going on here and I don't understand it all yet, but I'm hoping that as I go through the book, it will make more sense. So that is where I am so far. So I am back to reading 6 books in November. I mean, half of these, well, almost half of these are already started or about halfway through. So I'm hoping that I can actually finish all of these before the end of the year. But, you know, life happens, stuff gets crazy, especially around the holidays, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to try to power through, so wish me luck. Those are all the books that I want to read in December. My little old lady Snowball here says she's not sure that I can do it, but she will try to help me out if she can. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel and let Snowball and I know what was your favorite book in November and what book do you want to finish before the end of the year. All right, everyone, happy reading.